I'd like to welcome everybody, yes, we need to do some introductions, so I guess we'll start over there with Mayor Burton. Mayor Burton, you want to go first?
I would love to go first. Good morning, my name is Dirk Burton, I'm the mayor of Pittsburgh. Nick Jarvis with the league. Andrew Gruber, Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Kate Bradshaw, Bountiful City Council.
Holly Dean, Logan City Mayor, and I just will take 20 seconds. This is my last board meeting because I'm not re-upping and I'm out of town September for the meeting and conference. But it has been such a pleasure to work with all of you. So these are some Bluebird artisan chocolates from Logan. We have such a huge group today. I hope there's enough to go.
That's in the right spot.
But I don't have to leave.
Go the other direction.
Fun and just again, it's been a pleasure to work with all of you in the league, and I mean, I'm still around for 2 more years, but I won't be up for it. Thanks, everyone.
So Mayor Danes, let me
This is
just
definitely the right direction.
Sorry, I'm nutty chewy, so if you have a nut allergy, sorry.
I've appreciated your contributions to the board, and I think it's been important to have Northern Utah as the largest city. Ogden is kind of like, not quite.
They're one step, we're
But it is-
just one step further.
Yeah, that's been great to have you here, and it is important that we have your area represented on the board, so we'll miss you.
And I think there's a good nominee for a potential replacement.
Jessica Egbert, Mapleton City Council.
Mayor Michelle Kaplinsky from Grove City.
Jeff Silversmith, Mayor of Mill Creek.
Cameron Dale, Director of the League.
Liam Falco with the league. Jared Tingey, the new legal director of the league, and
So, Mayor, if it's all right, yeah, if you want to just take a minute, introduce yourself.
Yeah, that's where you're coming.
Mayor Burton is saying that because my last place was in West Jordan, so I was there for 5 years, and before that I was with Duchesne County. So really enjoyed it here thus far in the short amount of time, and look forward to get to know all of you.
Roger Two, General Counsel to the board. Let me say the Mayor Danes, who I've known many years. Thank you.
Molly Wheeler with the league.
Mary Winch, Manti City Council.
Mark Shepherd, Clearfield City.
Kelly Tran, Hebrew.
Justin Lee with the league.
Isaac Paxton, the Provo, Deputy Mayor.
That's my others league staff.
Angela Allen with the league. Katie Harden with the league.
Gary Watcott with the League.
Cassidy Hansen, also with the league.
And Kathy, will you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
From
West Jordan, but I want to clarify that Mayor Burton was not my boss while I was at West Jordan, because I worked for the council and I joke about that a lot. I would sit in on his cabinet and give a report from the council and make a joke. I'm like, oh yeah, it's okay, the mayor can't fire me. And now he's kind of, more my boss, so that's really fun. Before West Jordan, I went to grad school at Purdue and I studied political communication. Before that, I actually worked for LRGC and I proofread draft legislation. So I'm somewhat familiar with session, even though it's been a few years. So I'm excited to get back into state politics. For fun, Cam said, he's like, in your intro, you can say what you do for fun too. So I was given permission. I really enjoy skiing, being in the outdoors, travel. Those are all things. I also like taking care of houseplants. I'm not the best at it. I have some really big ones and some that look like they've been neglected, even though I swear I'm watering them. So that's just a little bit about me.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathy. And one thing I want to point out to the board is, as we have staffed up over these last couple of months, we made a strategic pivot in how we're going to be handling communications. When we promoted Molly to be deputy director, she took a lot of the feedback that you provided in April in St. George about what we want to do communications wise. And when we had the opening for communications, Molly really changed the position to reflect that feedback, and we're super excited to have Cassidy in that role. Likewise, we're thrilled to have Jared in his role as legal director. Now we have 2 attorneys who are full-time on staff with Jared and me, and we've already put Jared to work. His first day is one of the items on the agenda today, so it's been great to have his expertise in-house. Nick, will you just explain who's online?
Yes, online we have Mayor Julie Fulmer, Councilmember Carrie Malkovich, Mayor Mark Johnson, Mayor Michelle Randall, Mayor Mickey Wright, our colleague Meg Ryan, Councilmember Scott Phillips, and Mayor Troy Walker.
Perfect.
Members of the public, which it looks like it's some of our staff. We have David Dobbins, Miranda Jones Cox, and Tony Mark.
Excellent. And then Seth is just walking in. So Seth, welcome. We're just finishing introductions. One sad note I just want to make the board aware of. Some of you may have worked with Chuck Gates. He was a league staffer during my time here at the league. He passed away last week. His funeral is tomorrow. He worked up at the legislature as well, and some have known Chuck forever. So big loss in the just general political communication space. And as a former league staffer, I wanted to pass that along. Okay,
Thanks, Kim.
and then Mayor Monson is on a flight right now, so that's why he's unable to call.
We did also, I'm sorry, we had a phone number on here that I did not recognize. So if your name wasn't mentioned online, you are in attendance, just let us know here at some point.
This is Dustin White on the phone call, just if you're wondering.
Dustin White, Roosevelt.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. Okay, so I talked to Gary Watcott a minute ago about the local administrator advisor program. And Gary, do you want to take a minute on that? I just want to say, in traveling around the state and talking to people in different AOGs and rural communities, they are super appreciative of this program. And you know, the league advocated for this program and for funding of it as a way to help rural communities or smaller communities that don't have staff. And now that program is starting to get rolling. So Gary and Liam are working that you want to give us.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Obviously, we had a lot of, logistics to work behind it with the state. So we've been working on all of the agreements, if you will, between Molly and Nick and Liam and I. We worked out an agreement with the state for that funding to come through the league. And then we had to create interlocal agreements for each AOG to have with the league. And to ensure that all of these were done, we had to work out the metrics of performance. How do we know if the program's working? What are we going to track? We solved all of those issues. The money just barely started to come in, so we just barely got it. The program couldn't have started before now anyway. The state just didn't release the fund yet. So we're actually getting ready to roll, and I think in the next few weeks we should start seeing that program actually step up. There are some AOGs who actually hired some of their local administrative people in the area, and then others are still in the process. So I think in the next 30 days or so, it should really be up and running and going well. And I think we've got a good system in place. Liam and I will be spending most of our time actually working in that program. During the conference this coming next month, we actually have a rural breakfast in the morning where we'll talk to folks about this program in more detail and actually get more feedback on what they expect, what kind of projects that they might have. And also one of the things I'll be working on is some curriculum for training for electeds and people in rural areas on whatever topics they really feel is important for them. We'll start developing some of that and providing some training. Also for us, we haven't settled on the exact timing, but we will have some interval meetings with the AOGs and the LAAs on, say, like a quarterly basis, where we're going to talk to them in a roundtable setting. What's working, what's not, how do we make sure the program's fitting the needs, and are we doing the right kinds of projects where we're moving the needle? And so, the whole idea of this program is to bring depth and breadth to the locals in those rural areas and trying to, enhance local government in those areas. So we want to make sure that that's actually happening and that we're actually providing the right type of services we move forward through that. So it's moving along good. We wish we could have had it right ready at July 1, but nobody was quite ready for that. And, a lot of vacations and staff were gone at the state level. Anyway, it took a little while to roll it out, but we're on our way and it's really ready to go now.
Mayor, I think everybody knows this, but WFRC is one of the associations of government in the state. And so I guess I'm here representing them to some extent. I just want to say how much the AOGs appreciate the partnership with the league. I think it's a really healthy, collaborative relationship that honestly, I think is stronger now than I've ever seen it before. So let's keep that up. And the LAA is just one example of that. And then also, just a reminder for those of you that are in the more urban areas, the LAA is really focused on helping the small rural communities. So Mayor Shepherd, when you call and say, hey, can the local administrative advisor help us in Clearfield? The answer is probably going to be, well, probably not, but what can we do for you? Just a clarification.
Thanks, Andrew. Mayor Wright, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say, we have actually been able to get started. And we have, Brock Jackson through 6 County will become our local administrator, and we've already buried him with tons of work. And so anything I can do to help push this program and make sure it keeps funded, I will do.
Thank you, Mayor. That's what I heard when I was down there, that people were excited about it. So.
Yeah.
Right, let's now turn to our minutes for June 12, 2023. Are there any comments about those minutes? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to approve them.
Second.
Who made the motion? Yeah, I knew Mayor Shepherd made that motion. So, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. Thank you. And then if anyone has a conflict to declare, you can. You're online, you can do it by email, and if you're here, we've got form. So let's talk about boards and commissions. Then, Liam, do you want to talk about how you're going to appoint yourself to the?
I know, a little awkward, but hopefully you guys will let me through. So we've got a few here and we're already like 15 minutes behind. So I'm going to try and speed through these a little bit. But the first one is the Motor Vehicle Franchise Advisory Board. Cam is the main appointment there. And he is famously not busy, so he's usually able to make it, but there is an alternate position. And we're just recommending that I fill that so I can help him out there. We have the Moderate Income Housing Report Appeal Board, which was created this last legislative session. There are 3 individuals that are appointed to that in each case, one from the league, one from the home builders, and then one from the local AOG that the city would be a member of. And for our appointment, we are proposing that Rob Wall fill that. He's previously served as the city attorney in West Jordan and in Sandy. We have it in today.
Anybody trained, just let us know.
West Jordan has its tentacles everywhere.
Awesome, but yeah, Rob's great, and we thought a lot about that appointment there, and we think that he would be really great in that position. And then just for some other information, we have the $4 million that's coming to DWS that will be used to help with the subdivisions in the state. And there's a committee that's going to be reviewing RFPs there. And this isn't a board action, but just an informational item that we're having Jared Tingey, our legal director, serve on that for us. And then lastly, and definitely not least important, Mayor Shepherd applied to be on the NLC board of directors. And we don't have any Utah representation there. And Mayor Shepherd's been great and really involved in the housing accelerator. And we think that he'd be great there and want to have the board endorse Mayor Shepherd for that.
Do you need a motion on that?
Yeah,
Well, yeah, so at the end there, I have the staff recommendation. I'll just read that
Okay, sure.
if that makes that easier. So staff recommends that the board appoint Liam Threlke as an alternate on the Motor Vehicle Franchise Advisory Board. Rob Wall is the ULCT representative on Moderate Income Housing Appeals Board. And then staff recommends that the board endorse Mayor Shepherd to be on the NLC Board of Directors.
Okay, you want to make a motion there?
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion, Director Christie, seconded by Mayor Daines to approve the appointments. Before we vote on that, I would just want to, I mean, not that I want to thank him and Rob Wall, but I have seen Mayor Shepherd in action at NLC, and I commend you for the work that you've done there, and thank you for representing us on that board, and especially the work on the housing accelerator, because some of you know we had some issues about that, which I think we've worked through. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion to the motion? All in favor? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Sorry, any opposed? Okay, that's approved, and thank you, Lynn. Let's move now to the Board of Directors Nomination Committee and process. So I guess, Nick, are you going to talk about this?
Yeah, just very briefly want to go over and remind everyone that we will be electing new board members at our next board meeting at our annual convention. This year, we fortunately, depending on your perspective, we have more than 3 times as many candidates as we do slots available. There, in our talk with other state leagues at NLC, a lot of state leagues are asking, how do we get people to run for our board? We're out there trying to get people, and we have the opposite problem, which is
A good problem to have.
exactly a very good problem to have, that we have so many qualified candidates and so much interest in actually serving for our organization. So the nominations committee, which has to be finalized in this month, will be finalized sometime this week. Cam and I met with Mayor Walker last week, who will be chairing the committee as second vice president. They will meet once online to go through and kind of pare the candidates down of who they will be interviewing. They'll do that on August 29th. And then they'll meet the morning of the Wednesday of our conference, September 6th, to actually interview the candidates, vote, bring that slate to our business session on Friday. And from there, we will have a new board. We do have, as you can see here, some folks rotating off the board, and some have reapplied. But we want to thank everyone who has served on the board for everything they've done for the organization. And if you have any questions about the process, feel free to let me know. Liam will be helping me out this year in handling our 3 times as many candidates as we have positions. So any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Nick. And I'll just say, I know Mayor Walker has his work cut out for him, and Mayor Kapusi and I have both done that. Mayor Ramsey has done that. It's these are difficult decisions. I mean, there's qualified applicants. We'd like to have everybody that wants to serve be able to serve, but obviously we do have to make some decisions. And I hope folks would just understand that I think the discussions that I've seen with the nominating committee have been fair and have been, nominations have been made for the right reasons to try to make sure that this organization has good representation from all different kinds of communities. And anyway, it's hard, right?
Yeah, it's painful to make those calls.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Nick. Do you want to now talk to us? Any questions or about nominating? Let's go to talk about our finance stuff then.
Great, thank you. You'll see in your packet our year-end for fiscal year 2023 year-end budget report. This is kind of the raw numbers that we have from our previous fiscal year. You'll see a note at the very end of it that this is not the same as our audited financials. So this does not include capitalization of assets, depreciation, and also the big one that it doesn't include is the GASB 68 number, which is our pension liability / asset, which can really throw everything off. But this is more of the real what we spent last fiscal year. If you notice from our audited financial statements for fiscal year 2022, we spent negative money on employee benefits because of that GASB 68. So this is really what you're looking at, how much everything costs. Overall, we collected 101.6% of the revenue that we budgeted from our amended budget last year. If you remember when we amended that budget, it was because we had unforeseen revenue coming in with our conference registrations and exhibitors. We even exceeded that, you'll see. Sponsorship donation, we hit at 99%. Membership dues, we were at 100% with 99% of municipalities budgeted and participating. We had 104% of the registration and exhibitor space revenue, 101.6% of grants. We had significantly higher interest earnings than expected at 108%, and publication sales were just under what we had budgeted at 96%. Our expenditures were at 96% of budget this year. You'll see personnel accounts for about 47% of our annual budget. And at the end of the year, we expended almost 94% of that. A good reason for that was because we didn't have a deputy director for a good chunk of the year. Our operating and engagement funds make up about 19% of our budget, and we were 92.2% expended there. Our event expenditures are just about a quarter of our budget at 24%, and we were just over at 100.9% in fiscal year 2023. You'll notice that the fiscal year 2024 budget that you approved in June recognizes those increased event costs, and it's higher than the last year. Grants and special programs expenditures, a big chunk of that was Your Land, Your Plan, which is a 2-year grant. We spent a little more in year 1 than we plan to spend in year 2. So we were about 102.3% expenditure there, recognizing that we were at 111.6% in revenue, and those two were completely high. Overall, we are on great financial footing. The finances are in great shape. I did mention that this does not include depreciation, capitalization, and the pension liability / assets. So for what will actually be on our books, remember that we will be approving that in December. You also have attached our check register from March through March through June, the end of the fiscal year. And if you have any questions on that, let me know. We have all of those particular checks here, so we can pull them out if you have any questions there. If not, we would ask the board to approve both the year-end financial report and the March through June 2023 check register.
Any questions for Nick? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the 2023 year-end budget report and the check register for the year-end.
Second.
Okay, second by Carrie Malkovich, and any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, you got your approval, Nick.
Great, thank you.
All right. So the next item is the discussion of some potential litigation. We actually probably do not need to go into closed session on this, but I'm going to turn this over to Roger and Jared Cheney and Ken.
Perfect. Thank you. We were hoping to get your blood pressure going with the title here on the agenda, but we kept it broad because even as of 2 hours ago, we were still working through what the next steps are going to be on this. This is in regards to a supplemental brief request that the legislature made of the league in regards to the redistricting lawsuit. We didn't want to put any more in writing as we were working through it throughout the weekend. And I want to thank Jared publicly for all the time he spent this weekend as we were working through all the various pieces.
I want to thank him too, because he did yeoman's work, especially yesterday on Sunday, reading briefs, writing emails to the amicus committee, and actually wrote above and beyond. So thank you.
For those who were not on the board in 2019, the league created an amicus policy for the first time for when the league gets involved with litigation. And there are several steps that have to occur in order for the league to participate in amicus in filing friend of the court briefs. I'm going to turn it over to Roger because he's going to give just a quick procedural review of that. Then Jared will explain the substance of the request that we received. Ultimately, our amicus subcommittee, which includes league president Mayor Silvestrini and representation of the Municipal Attorneys Association and league staff, ultimately this morning decided not to recommend to the board that we get involved here. So that's the key takeaway. There's a recommendation to not get involved, but because of the political nature of this, we wanted to make sure everybody was aware briefly of the process and the thought pattern. Roger.
Just briefly following up what Cam said. 2019, Cam and I, Dave Church, who was in general counsel before, felt that we ought to have a policy about when you lent the name of the league to litigation. We hadn't had a lot of times it happened, but we had a few of requests. Sometimes there were cases this really weren't that significant, but we had a couple that we have done. We felt there needed to be a formalized process for them. And so that's what was the sort of review committee to look at those particular cases. The particular issue here is the reapportionment initiative that was passed by the voters in 2018, which the legislature chose to largely undo. And I don't think they would disagree with that characterization. And that, and in effect, then we have a lawsuit about the issue. Normally, amicus which stands for friend of the court, are filed as part of the briefing schedule before a case is ever heard. This is not an actual amicus. The case was heard, and after oral argument, the court made a request for a supplemental request for some information. So in that sense, it's a different cat, how this has been framed. But the goal here was to have this board be a screening committee to basically view whether the legislation or whether the litigation was meritorious, whether our involvement was adding something to it, whether it was political in nature, and also whether it complied largely with the policies that we've enacted. Now, while the policies are not absolute, I'm just saying there's ways around it, we want to do it, but the argument was, one, we either had to have a city who was a party to litigation. In the cases we've done, the city was either defending or promoting, they were actually part of the litigation. Or we had a city actually make a request for the league to be involved. In this particular case, we don't have either. We do not have a city who's a party, and we have had no city ask for involvement. And so with that, I'll turn time over to Jared. We went through our process and looked at the factors of the limited time we have actually put the league's name on a piece of litigation. And part of that factor was also cost, timing, and other factors that went into the mix. So we met last week, finalized a non-position this morning, and so there really is nothing to vote on because we're not recommending anything. But what I thought would be having run by what some of the legal issues were in this particular case.
Yeah, so I think both Cam and Roger have really set the stage. I think at this point there were, so like Roger said, it was regarding reapportionment and voting districts. Really, it came down to discussing the power of the initiatives versus the power of the legislature, and whether there are the constitutional issues that come behind those arguments. The Supreme Court requested, they had 3 questions that they submitted to the parties, and it was specifically to the parties, but there were others that joined in. UAC has decided to join, not to join, but to file their own amicus brief. And so that will be filed. As we discussed, as we looked at our policy and saw what the policy was and really the options we were left to were either we sign on with UAC or we submit our own brief, our own document, answering the court's questions, or third, not file anything. After meeting with the subgroup, like Roger said, I think that there were 2 overriding factors. First being the policy that requires a city to make a written request to the amicus subgroup and to make that decision. And there wasn't. There were no cities that made that request. It was just the legislature.
And we had nobody was party.
And we don't have any city that's party, right? And the second thing would be that there is a possibility that the league's membership would be divided on particular issues that would be said in any brief or any answer to the questions that the Supreme Court wanted answers to. And so as the league keeping one unified voice, those were the 2 overriding factors. Primarily the policy that a city make the request. And since there wasn't any city that was a party, that was also a consideration that we considered. So I'll kind of turn the time back over to you.
Perfect. Let me some of you are probably asking yourselves, why would the court have even reached out to us in the first place around state redistricting? And that's because this is not about redistricting. It's about the balance between the state initiative power and the power of a legislative body to modify whatever is in that initiative. That being said, that what the court was asking for in the supplemental brief was for what sort of level of review should the court use when looking at that conflict, when you have an initiative that voters have put into place as law, and then the role of the legislative body in making law and potentially tweaking that initiative. So the redistricting piece is controversial and very political. But in this case, the redistricting case is not about redistricting. It's about that balance between the initiative power and the power of a city council.
Cam, let me also point out, cities face sometimes referendum on their actions. We can't find an example where there's been an initiative that's been brought against the city. But that is basically propose your own law. I think the actions of cities in question through the referendum process, and that's not what's an issue here at all. The issue here is an initiative initiating a new policy for a city by the voters. And in particular, this case was brought by the litigants, the petitioners, utilizing a section of the Constitution that had never been done before. And that's what cut people by surprise. The normal language is that the legislature is in charge of redistricting. Their argument was a provision of what's called the Bill of Rights section, which in effect says that petitioners propose through the process reforms in government. Arguably, it says the legislature can't change that. And that's what the litigation was about. And that's been out there for months. It was the triggering of asking for the supplemental information sort of brought this about. But that's sort of the whole dynamics. It's a rare, we don't have an example of initiatives involving local governments. But we also appreciated the fact that there's interest in a broad sense about the issues. We just didn't feel on the board example to comply with their process. We just simply didn't have the consensus that we ought to be participating.
So
Question, sorry, on Roger, on your, so the only process I could think about when you were saying you hadn't seen an initiative process into the city is there is a path that I've seen used where an applicant will request a change to zoning standards. And, we'll pay a fee and submit something, and it'll go through planning commission and then ultimately up to a council to vote on. Is that
That's
something?
what I call that
or is that
a referendum
referendum?
challenge to the actions you take.
Well, even that, that's not
That's not-
the initiative, that process that we're dealing with here is by petition. And it's different a lot of communities have ordinances that allow somebody to seek an ordinance revision that goes through the normal land use process, right? And then ultimately the legislative body of the municipality makes that decision. What we're really dealing with here is the initiative process that's petition driven. And, initiative is a constitutional right that the Constitution of the state of Utah gives the people the constitutional right to start an initiative to enact legislation. And the Constitution also, the legislative body also has that power. It's kind of like both sides could do that. And really, this is a question about the intersection of those. What happens when, is fundamentally is the people's initiative power more compelling than the legislatures because it comes from the people. And the Supreme Court, what they ask on this supplemental briefing, they really asked a specific question: what standard of review, which is a legal term, what standard of review should we be using to evaluate these competing legislative rights, under the Constitution?
Particularly the one under the bill.
Yeah. What I want to say about this, first of all, is that from my understanding of what we were being asked to do and understand, we have not received any kind of an official invitation. We have received an email from Leg Council, and we have received some contacts from individual legislators saying we should get involved in this. But they're really not asking us to address the question that the Supreme Court presented for supplemental briefing. What they're really wanting us to do is kind of be a cheerleader for the position that should have been, we should have participated when the initial case was filed if we were going to do that, in my view. So they don't really want us to answer the question that the Supreme Court is asking. And frankly, whatever we would say is not going to be original or additive to the process. It's really just saying me too on something. So it's not adding anything new. That's one thing. This is not a burning question for our membership. The other thing that is kind of interesting structurally that Rogers pointed out is that one of the reasons that we don't see initiatives relating to the structure of government affecting municipalities is that our existence, this is something that we get told a lot by the legislature, is that we are creatures of state statute.
Political subdivision, right?
They set the rules.
We are not the kind of government that gets redesigned by an initiative because we're created by statute. I mean, not that the public couldn't modify that in some respect, but we're different than the state legislature in that regard. Because we're not like a constitutional, element of our government. So anyway, that's kind of the reason that this committee recommends that to not do this. I think I want to say is that this decision is pretty politically fraught. We do have people in the legislature that would like us to do this. But it's not within our policy. And the question kind of is, are we going to forget our policy? And, and when we don't have a request from a city, and even if we could get one, right, there could be one. But it isn't the kind of thing that is being, in my view, clamoring for, right? It'd be somebody who would be doing a favor by making that request because nobody's come forward so far. But it is fraught that we say no. But on the other hand, there is something to be said about the fact that this issue doesn't affect us directly. We are being asked to do this at the last minute. So like to try to scramble and file something would be really super difficult given our limited resources, and it isn't going to add anything new. So that's kind of why we came with this recommendation to you. But it is a politically fraught question, and that's why, as I mentioned in this committee meeting, as like president, I would like to know what the board feels about this, because I don't want to give an answer on this if the board has strong feelings contrary to what we're recommending or not. So
I have a question. They said it won't add anything new. Will it detract from will it have an impact at all?
So, I suppose somebody could say, where's the league on this? They could say that. I'm not sure that they would. That it's the Supreme Court that matters here. And I'm not sure that the Supreme Court is like, the way they normally work, they're not asking why there isn't somebody at the table on this. They're really looking at this issue in the context of the question that they raised and the parties that are before the court. And an amicus is just hey, we think we have something to add. We're a friend of the court. We're not a party, right? And so, frankly, I've always had a question as a lawyer, like what value amicus briefs have anyway. They may have some role in some time, but really what this is about is making some certain portions of the legislature feel better about, So I mean, that's not to say there couldn't be political fallout from saying we aren't going to do this, right? That's the decision for the knife edge of the walking.
There will let us come. One of the answers, which actually for some of them, actually ended up being on the side of people petitioning this. I mean, not every answer is what the legislature don't want to hear from us.
Mayor?
I think it's pretty cool that they came to the league to ask us this. It shows that we had some input and some influence, and that's great. However, it's not, we don't have a dog in this fight, and I don't think we want to put one in here. I think we'll lose if we put in there either way, because it's so divided. Tension aside, should stay out and let the chips fall where they may and work with it after it's done, so that we can work with all the legislators and accomplish what we have to do, because we have enough to do already.
I'm the same. If it's contrary to policy, then it's not a priority of our membership. It's a clear decision for me too.
And the political downside is pretty significant with our current legislature.
Okay, so we don't, this is not a matter we vote on, but I am just gonna say, I'm gonna ask, is there anyone who objects to the league declining to file an amicus in this particular matter? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
They're walking an attorney.
Mayor Walker?
I really didn't want to be in.
I just wanted to say, I agree with what you said, Jeff. I think the amicus brief is a great way to hire lawyers to write briefs. I don't know that it carries a whole lot of weight. I just don't see the value in it.
Thank you, Mayor.
I think it's clear we shouldn't file.
Okay. All right, well then, Lisa, you have your,
Yeah, so what we will do, next steps today, because the court's deadline is today. One, we'll let UAC know we will not be signing on to their brief. So UAC will have a brief, but we will not. Second, we will notify the legislature that we will not be providing a brief. And the two main reasons that Jared articulated are, one, policy, that the city didn't make the request. And two is the lack of consensus within the membership. We didn't show you all the considerations the amicus policy subgroup uses, but we went through them with the subgroup last week and again this morning. And I think it is accurate that we did not have consensus with that group. And just so everyone's aware, in addition to that subgroup, we also invited several other key attorneys to be on that call this morning, just to make sure we were gathering additional input before we came to the board meeting this morning. So that's what we will relay. I do think that there will be some political disappointment and there will be some political pushback legislatively, but I want to emphasize two last points. One that Roger made, that what we heard from some of our attorneys were arguments that are not consistent with what the legislature requested. So, Merchant, that gets to your point that if we signed on in part, but not in other parts, that could actually not be helpful to what the legislature requested. Then the second piece of it gets to Mayor Silvestrini's point that all the arguments that we as a subgroup felt like were arguments that the court should hear are all part of the state's brief already, or UAC is raising them in their briefs. Okay. Thank you for that discussion. That's helpful, and we will follow up this afternoon.
okay, thanks. So let's move on to our advocacy and engagement update. Cam, you want to talk about this?
Yes. Okay, over the next hour, we have several things we need to accomplish here. And different league staffers will take the lead on each piece. We also have guests here from Envision Utah who have returned after meeting with us in June to give an update on where they're at and also discuss potential recommendations coming out of their work. First, we will have the civility policy resolution. I'll turn over to Molly momentarily to present that to this body. After Molly, we put UEOC priorities and timelines on here, but just recognize there's still a lot of spaghetti against the wall within the UEOC. So we actually don't have any specific policies for you to consider. Mayor Ramsey has to cast a vote on August 30th, and right now it's still a little up in the air of what you'll be voting on because all the subgroups are still more in the brainstorm phase than they are in the final recommendation phase. We'll give an update on guiding our growth because that closes at the end of the month, and I think that will inform a very rapid September at the UEOC. The one of the several items we brought to the UEOC is the transportation utility fee. We have our first official negotiation on that this week. And so we wanted this board to adopt some key principles, essentially define the sandbox. So I'll take that one when we get there. And then we'll do Envision Utah, and then we'll have caucus meetings at the annual convention in a couple of weeks. And Justin wanted to get feedback from the board about how to improve the caucuses. So that's what we hope to accomplish over the next hour. Molly, take it away with the civility resolution.
Excellent. I will try to be efficient since we've got a lot to do. So previously, when we have been working with Tammy Piper, and we had Tammy Piper come in mid-year, it was very well received. We received a lot of feedback
of what else can we do? How can the league be engaged in this? How can we lead out on this? And so what we had decided to do as part of that was to bring forward a resolution, speaking to these values and speaking to this kind of cause. So question we have for the board is this language was circulated. In order for a resolution to be put forward, it can be sponsored by a city, or in the past, we have had a few moments where the board itself has sponsored a resolution. So our question to you is this a resolution either in concept or is currently drafted that the league would, or pardon me, that the board would be interested in sponsoring? Or should we be reaching out and find a city to sponsor the resolution? And then the second part of that is, if so, if yes, the board does want to sponsor this, are there any changes or amendments that we need to see in this resolution? If there are little tweaks and changes, we can work on them between now and LPC. This needs to be presented to LPC ahead of time, that we can do. If there are any substantive changes that we need to be putting into this, we may need to get together a subgroup to work on it just to be efficient. As Kim mentioned, we have a lot to get through in the next hour. So if this does need an entire reworking, then maybe we pull it out, work as a subgroup and get going on that.
I thought this was done. Oh, go ahead.
Gary?
Yeah, Carrie Malkovich, City of Woodland Hills. I really appreciated this resolution. I think it's spot on what a lot of cities are feeling right now. It does go in collaboration with what the governor is saying on a national level. And I think that we can actually, as a board, not only help our cities in this endeavor, but maybe now, especially with Mark being on the national board, that we can be again a leader for the nation, supporting this idea of disagreeing better. So I fully support that the board adopt this, and then we send it forward so that every city can then adopt a resolution that has already been presented. A lot of smaller cities, they don't have the bandwidth to put something like this together, and it's helpful to have this template in place. So that would be my recommendation, and if necessary, a motion.
Thank you, Carrie. And, the other thing that I'll say about this is that this is coincident with the Dignity Index presentation that we had at the St. George Convention. I got tremendous feedback from our membership about that presentation and how that resonated with them. So this is, actually putting something down on paper that gives some support behind that similar, sentiment about civility. So I think that it would be good for the board to take leadership on this.
Jeff, can I say something? Jeff, can I say
Yeah,
something?
go on.
Thank you. I agree with what both of you have said, and actually this has been a conversation for a while. It's exciting to me to have this in a draft form written down as words, because this conversation's been going on the last few years. There have been a couple of other states doing their own version of some kind of a civility compact, some kind of a statement and a deliberate decision for civil discourse amongst themselves. And these conversations have been happening at the National League meetings, with the president of the Utah or of each of the state leagues for a while. But to reach the point where we have this and that we're kind of tying it with the Dignity Index, it is coincidental, but also awesome that the governor is doing this with the governors as well, because that wasn't even part of this plan, part of this vision for what our cities would do and what we could do. But it does work out great timing wise, I think. But I really also love the idea of having this come from the board, having this resolution come from all of us as a unified declaration of our commitment to civil dialogue and exhibiting dignity. And I actually think this organization, this board, does such a good job of doing that. I think we model that. I think this is the perfect thing to come from all of us. And thanks for all the work to get to this point, because it's exciting.
Just an added thought to what the mayor just said, that I like that if the board does this, that it's coming from roughly 20 cities, not just one city, if you will. It's coming from the voice of 20, so I really like that. I probably add something to what Carrie Malkovich said just a moment ago. I don't know that this is maybe the template that I would use to implement some of the things that it asks for, such as the code of conduct and things like that. So if the league does have the bandwidth for now in September, some of the staff can put together a draft, or rather a template of some of the things you think we could see. And have some of our cities, especially the smaller ones, have a template that they could use to put into action some of the things you call for, that I think would be helpful for some of those.
So following on that, then, is there anyone who does not think that this should come from the board that we need to hear from? Okay,
Not hearing anybody being opposed to this coming from the board, so I think I have a motion from Carrie and maybe a second from Mayor Ramsey.
well, can I just ask really quickly before we get to that then, are there any, other than Seth's comment of, you know, the league for some of these actual outcomes, trying to draft some of these outcomes that cities could adopt on their own, are there any technical, and actually, as I've gone through and Councilmember Egbert pointed out, there are a couple technical fixes we need in here. But are there any substantive changes that we need in this resolution?
No, I thought it was great. Isaac?
I don't know, I mean, I said something to the league about it, but I prefer instead of we urge, here's why. We urge cities to adopt code of ethics. If we're really confident that a year from now, 99% of them will have done that, I like that language. I would prefer we urge them to consider adoption of code of ethics. Because I can see, we don't have a problem here, we don't need this. And I just don't like the optics of us urging something and we don't deliver 100% on it. Just get that waters down our credibility somehow. So that was one thing I thought, you know, we don't like one size fits all. So if there's a group that thinks we like these 4 menu items, but we don't like the code of ethics, why do we then urge every city to adopt one? So that was the only little fudge thing I thought might be wise. And if it's easy to just change that word and everybody's fine with it, that was only real substantive one. I had a minor change on one of the preamble ones that says local elected officials must, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, why don't we just say local elected officials strive to lead by example in promoting respectful and inclusive communication instead of something that sounded like a mandate that needs to be heard by our local elected officials. Darn it, they must start being ethical. I just liked that they're already striving to or something. So I just have those 2 little comments. And if those are, whether we handle those offline or you guys want to do that now, that was, since you're asking, was there anything, I feel like that one was kind of substantive that we urge everyone to adopt the code of ethics was something.
And just for clarity, for those who are following online, Isaac's comments are for the final whereas clause. So it says, whereas the Utah League of Cities and Towns acknowledges that upholding dignity and civility in local politics is essential to maintaining the credibility and effectiveness of local government as a whole, and local leaders must lead by example in disagreeing better. So that is one of Isaac's points of that must language. And then the second is for the code of conduct that is the second kind of resolution point, and that says we recommend that local governments adopt a code of conduct. So I think the 2 points we're discussing.
You can tell Isaac and I work together, right? But with resolutions, they're the feel good thing, right? It's always a feel good until someone is mad at us and grabs it and goes line by line and then comes after us. So, I mean, and well, I'll tell you, I don't sign resolutions in Provo. If the council wants to do them, they're more than welcome to do as many feel good, happy. But when I get up to the Capitol and talk to people and say, did you get the Provo City Council resolution? Oh, we never read resolutions because they really don't carry anything. But with our dignity and civility index that was promoted, it was fantastic. This one is good, but again, we have to be literally line by line because everyone will say this feels good until someone has a bone to pick with us. And then they're going to go line by line and come after us and say, hey, it said you must do this. And we can point to this city and that city and this city, and they're not doing it. So just a little leery, the softening of language and resolutions that doesn't get us in trouble is always a safe place to land.
Here's what I'm gonna propose, and, so we can actually adopt the exact language of this at our September meeting. And so we have a motion and a second, I think, at least I'm gonna ask you guys to approve this in concept. So we move it forward, and then I'm just gonna encourage anybody that has any tweaks to the language to get those to Molly. And then we can talk about those in our September meeting, hopefully, and I don't have a problem with Isaac or Mayor Kafusi's changes. I don't think it undercuts the tenor of what we're trying to advance here, to say, encourage or strongly encourage rather than must, something like that.
Exactly.
But I do think that being in alignment with our governor on this issue and putting this out there, giving cities a template of something to adopt, does move the ball forward on this and raise the profile of the issue of civility, that we're concerned about it, it's important for city leadership to lead on this issue, and that means we have to do it too, right? We have to treat people that come to our meetings with that kind of same dignity and respect. So,
Mayor,
Mayor Johnson.
yeah.
one question, just procedurally, at some point before the annual meetings, we've got to have a public hearing on this for the language is there. We can do it by Zoom, we did it last year. So we don't take past language to the floor of the organization on Friday. So we can do that. I just want to know there is.
So we can have a public hearing in September, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll schedule as a special Zoom meeting talking about last year.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Johnson?
Yeah, just real quick, I just want to make sure I understand this, because I'm liking what I'm reading, but I'm assuming this is directed to the elected officials and not necessarily the citizens, because, it'd be nice if they also understood the rules and the rules. But
You lead by example. I think if we adopt this, if councils adopt this, these are, essentially our code of conduct that we can remind citizens of that. I mean, I think most of us kind of do that anyway. Who hasn't talked to people in public comment or in a public meeting and said, look, we all want the best thing for our city. We're just having a civil discussion about this. We ask you to be civil, ask you to let other people be heard. Those kinds of sentiments. I think we all do that anyway when we're controlling meetings. But so I think it can be a model for our citizens as well, if that's responsive.
no, I think that's great. I mean, we had some problems in the past, and that was resolved when we had Todd Godfrey come in and train our council members directly about what was appropriate in Robert's Rules of Order. I know that helped a lot. So yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, so Carrie and Dawn, if I may, then we're gonna, your motion is to recommend that we adopt the sentiment of this, that we're gonna wordsmith this between now and our September meeting, and staff will come back with a compilation of those proposed revisions, that among those revisions will be making sure that the language is appropriate so that we're not caught in a box on it, that it's strongly encouraged rather than must. Okay, all right. Any further discussion?
I just want to volunteer, Tony and Ms. Gordon, would like to be involved in things. to help me.
It's always a pleasure to work with Tony Barker. I look forward to it.
Okay, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good. Well, that only took quite a minute.
No.
Good discussion, thank you.
Perfect. And process wise, the LPC today functions as the resolutions committee per our bylaws. So when Mayor Kafusi chairs resolutions committee, will present this as the board resolution. And then same thing, make the same pitch to members of the LPC that they can suggest potential amendments or tweaks, and then it will come forward for consideration in September. Just timing wise, because the South House bumped us up, we normally have an LPC right before the convention, because they bumped us up, we don't have a scheduled LPC before the convention. So when Roger said we would do a Zoom call with the LPC, that's what he's referencing, is right before the convention. So today will be one resolutions committee meeting, then we'll have the second one to essentially validate or what's where I'm looking for here, but to endorse the ratify, that's where I was looking for. They'll ratify whatever amendments come out of today's meeting and over the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
So one more thing on resolution. I have seen a draft of a resolution that I think was being proposed by Salt Lake City.
That would be at LPC today.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, because that one already had a city sponsor. That goes straight to the resolutions committee. This one did not have a city sponsor. We were responding to general board direction over the last few months. We thought it was appropriate to start the conversation at the board level. So that's actually a perfect segue to transportation utility fee, because the resolutions that the resolutions committee or LPC ultimately ratify, that sets the policy platform for the league that the membership then ultimately signs on to during the annual convention.
So the one that, I was saying, the one that I've seen a draft of that Salt Lake City was, I guess, is going to propose, is basically trying to get the legislature's attention about not preempting local control. And we can talk about it. In concept, I have no problem with it. I think there's some word changes that are required. So.
Yep. So when we present it to the resolutions committee today, we anticipate there will be other cities saying, the spirit, need to modify. So we'll be working on that through the rest of the month. As staff, we went back and forth on whether or not to ask a league membership to do a formal resolution around the transportation utility fee. We ultimately decided against that because it's transportation utility fee is one specific topic as opposed to transportation in general, and we have policy resolutions around transportation in general. Instead, what we decided made the most sense was to ask the board to support some general principles around this specific item. We have a subgroup in the LPC that has been providing us with specific feedback on the policy. So that subgroup's met a couple of times this summer, and they've already chimed in about whether or not there should be a hearing or whether or not there should be a dedicated account. So we're already into the nitty gritty there, but we recognize that before we get too far down the lines in the nitty gritty space, it's helpful to take a step back and make sure we're on the same page of what success looks like from a principles perspective. So that's why we wanted to bring to the board, separate from the resolution process, these key principles around the transportation utility fee. Hopefully everyone had a chance to read the memo. I'll come back to actually, before I get into the memo, let me just bring this back to the UEOC. Within the UEOC, there are subgroups upon subgroups upon subgroups. And at LPC today, we're going to just give a quick update on here are the different subgroups and here are all the different policy ideas that are still being bantered out there. There's nothing yet for the LPC to vote on, which is going to make it tricky for you at the end of the month. Mayor Ramsey, because August 30th, the UEOC will meet. We have brought up the transportation utility fee within the UEOC and have had some really spirited debate about whether or not cities should be able to use that tool going forward. The Guiding Our Growth public survey closes at the end of the month. Laura Hansen spoke to this board back in June, we gave you some quick high-level thoughts about where we thought Guiding Our Growth was going to end up. We are getting regular reports from Laura and from Envision Utah about where the public is trending. And I expect the governor is going to speak about Guiding Our Growth results during the annual convention. The survey will close August 31st. The governor speaks at our convention September 7th. And then Envision, I'll put words in your mouth. There'll be a report by the end of September that will articulate what the public has told us through Guiding Our Growth. The high-level trends revolve around four different categories on housing, transportation, open space, and water. Thank you. There are multiple potential policy outcomes in each of those spaces. I also think from what the preliminary results we've seen this far is those survey results will actually validate a lot of the bills we've already worked on and already passed, and will validate a lot of what's happening at the local level. So it doesn't necessarily need brand new legislation. It more validates the work that we've been doing to date. But just know that at that September board meeting, we'll have those preliminary results. And I think September is going to be filled to the brim with deliberation about, here's these public survey results. Do we need to run bills to achieve those, yes or no? And some of them could take the form of preemption, some could take the form of partnerships, still a little up in the air. With that as kind of the political context, we've now presented to two different interim committees about the transportation utility fee. And we received a lot of questions from committee members about that fee. Switching over here. We've had a couple of different stakeholder groups like the Taxpayers Association and the Libertas Institute who've attacked it. There are really three policy options here. Nick, can you scan down? Right there. Well, actually, the three policy options for legislature is either the legislature does nothing, and that's what number one is there in section 2. Option number 2 is that they provide a middle road that defines the reasonableness of a process and possibly an outcome. And then number 3 would be to preempt local governments. So on the record in committee last week, I said the league would be opposed to preemption, whether we were willing to talk about option 1 and option 2. First meeting of the stakeholders will be this week. Now that definition of reasonableness, we could spend all day on it. The way I've quickly summarized it is at the top of what Nick has here on the screen, letter A and letter B. Is the charge bear a reasonable relationship to the cost of the service? And is there a reasonable process for imposing the fee? That's the standard of reasonableness that the Supreme Court has upheld. But when we heard in committee the last couple of months, then legislators asking questions of if the legislature blesses this fee, will that lead to a proliferation of it? Should the legislature look at the reasonableness standard for all fees as opposed to just the transportation utility fee? It could open up Pandora's box that way. And then what does reasonableness look like when it comes to process and outcomes? When we asked you back in June as the league board, how many of your cities were considering a transportation utility fee, the majority of you said yes, you were considering it in upcoming years. And that's the sense that we've gotten from league members is everyone is intrigued by the tool now that the Supreme Court has upheld it, but waiting to see what happens politically. So that is the background. Nick, will you scan down? I've summarized those political considerations. The third one is actually, no, I've summarized those. Now go down to the potential guiding principles. So this is what we're looking for feedback on from you before we officially start those deliberations this week. That these would be the guiding principles around the transportation utility fee. First and second relate to just a legal standard that the Supreme Court upheld. That the transportation utility fee is indeed a fee, not a tax. And any legislation should be narrowly tailored to the transportation utility fee and not deal with fees in general. The third question, or the third principle here is around functionality, and this gets to the political issue. So I mentioned before that there was a sense from some legislators of if we quote unquote bless this by putting a reasonable process in statute, does the legislature take political heat for a local tool? Is it better just to let locals do it on their own or preempt us altogether? So this functionality one is admittedly a tricky one for us, but it's essentially saying we recognize that if the legislature does set a reasonable process, it's not going to be an easy process. And we can live with something that's not easy so long as it's not impossible. It still needs to actually be doable and respect the role of local elected officials. And that gets to 4 through 8, which is that process would be transparent. There's a needs analysis with it. Local elected officials are still making the determination. And so the state doesn't put a cap on it or anything like that. There's accountability back to the residents about it. And it's a supplement. It doesn't replace other revenue streams. So in other words, if Kaysville City continues to receive money from the motor fuel tax and from county imposed options, and Kaysville City has a transportation utility fee, which they do now, that's an add-on to those other revenue sources. It's not a replacement for, or the city is not required to be revenue neutral and you have to reduce property tax or other sorts of changes that way. So this is the sandbox that we as staff are proposing to you to guide our deliberations. Again, our subgroup has already started in the nitty-gritty of what specific things could look like here, but we want your policy direction.
Period.
Question on number,
Go ahead.
a question on number 3, functionality. I understand, not easy, but not impossible. I sometimes worry about our smaller communities that have very limited staff to go through the processes if it's heavy on bureaucratic paperwork, I guess would be the word. Are you going to advocate that there is some sort of help, or would that be a league, an ask from the league to help smaller cities be able to navigate through the process? Because I think they're the ones that really are needing these revenue sources the most in terms of roads. And I just see that it could be more of a burden than a help if we're not careful in making sure that the process is something that any city would be able to participate in.
So Mayor, if I may, I think this comes back to the fundamental question of does your city have a need for a transportation utility fee? And if so, your city needs to demonstrate that need. So if you're a small community and you have that need, then yes, you do need to go through a process to demonstrate to your residents that you have a need. That's how it's legal as a fee in the first place. So when we presented this language of doable, not easy, not impossible, it's with the recognition that in order right now, even without state legislation, to meet the legal threshold for a fee, Mapleton City or Woodland Hills City or any other city or town has to go through certain steps anyway. Otherwise it wouldn't hold legal muster as a fee. So then the question becomes, if the legislature codifies those, in a way, it may make it easier for those smaller communities because now they know what those exact steps are.
Well, and I would think too, just like we deal with business licensing fees and other fees that have to have a rational basis, which is the hallmark of the court decision on this. I think most communities are going to need to go to a municipal advisor to talk about how to calculate the reasonableness anyway. And while, I mean, this is going to be like a cottage industry for municipal advisors, but they're going to be able to help smaller communities know that. So, I mean, I think if smaller communities just know that, there are steps you're going to have to take, but you go talk to a municipal advisor about it and they'll help you through it. I think that's going to be the answer to your question about resources and things like that, because they will know, they'll know small, medium, large communities, what needs to be done to go through the rational basis test and help you through the whole process, I would expect.
That's kind of what I was wondering about, was just everybody expects that it will be difficult, and I think that's okay. Everybody's okay with that. It's just sometimes those that don't have in-house legal advice, who might not always understand the wordage once the legislature puts it out, just to make sure that there's some avenue. We have our legal counsel here with the league that a lot of cities have utilized for questioning those types of things, but just to make sure that those cities don't just throw up their hands and say, well, we have so many other things on our plate that we don't understand it. Just as we go forward, making sure that they say we know, or we ask them if they need assistance in just understanding what is required in that process, because process, especially on the legislative level, can get very complicated, and we don't want those who really do need it to just throw up their hands in the air thinking that they're all alone.
Yeah, as we're considering the advocacy principles, what conversations have we had about grandfathering? Because there are quite a few, and so is the assumption that whatever is defined, everyone who is currently in the pipeline would have to go through that, or that there'd be a grandfathering process?
Yeah, that's a great question there. So let me address that. There are 13 cities that have imposed it, of which 12 still exist. One city actually pulled theirs back because of the litigation.
Is that prior to the litigation? There were that many that had. Okay.
Yep. There were 13, so there are 12 that currently still exist. So within our subgroup, we've started that discussion. The reason we didn't put it into a principle yet is we didn't yet have consensus internally of what what made sense and felt like that conversation needed to happen with the 12 cities that still had the fee before it came to this level. And this also is why we didn't go the policy resolution route, because once the members adopt that in September, it's locked in. Whereas this, you're giving us the general direction that we can keep coming back as we continue the dialogue. So I think for now it'd be TBD.
I don't know the right answer either, but
But it's a
good
good question. I mean, there's gonna be 12 cities who really want to know.
Kim-
Yeah,
Kim,
yeah.
And I have a question. So we're one of the 12 cities, we have a road utility fee, and I remember being on council for this, I'm pretty, and I don't know about all of the legal requirements to get it passed, but pretty sure we just made a motion, we said, we're gonna have it, and we did it. And then we left it to staff to figure out how to make it legal, to make sure that it works. So I guess my question is, does this complicate it more? Getting the legislature involved, always complicated things. And the other thing is, I have a hard time truly believing that they're not gonna say, oh, well, now cities have this extra fee, so let's just go back to them and say, okay, we're gonna reduce this, reduce that. In theory, it's a great idea for them to not touch it and not touch us, but they tend not to do that.
Yeah, no, that's not work that way.
So I guess that's what I was wondering, what we have in place, maybe the cities that have it in place could really go and advocate and help other cities, or maybe we can, shout and tell them how to do it. Or is this really the best route? to
I
accomplish
think the
that?
legislature is gonna have their fingers in this no matter what.
So we're just trying to get.
And the best thing we can do is have them, not prohibit it and to the extent that they can resolve some of the questions that some of the detractors of the fee might have to say, okay, here's what you need to do to establish the reasonable basis for the fee, like they've done really with business licensing and other things like that. It's not, this wouldn't be newly plowed turf for them to set some parameters about what you have to do in order to implement the fee. As long as they allow it to happen and they don't make it overly onerous,
So Mayor Collins, let me add to that, and Mayor Silvestrini is spot on. There are three ways this could go. Way number one is just no bill. And I think in general, that would be our preference, is that there's just no bill. Now, we know there are efforts right now for a bill to preempt us. So that's being shopped around. So then we can, we'll fight any bill to preempt us. So then the question becomes, are we better off to come forward and say, we can live with a bill that has this reasonable process in place, but has to follow these principles. So essentially you fight a bill with a different bill that we can live with. If neither bill goes forward, then we are where we are right now, which is, the court has upheld the ability of cities to do it. But because the court was silent on reasonableness, there are quite a few legislators who are saying, well, if the court was silent on reasonableness, maybe we need to step in and define what's reasonable. And if the legislature doesn't, then maybe there'll be future litigation that will.
I do have to emphasize one thing. The standard of reasonableness is the standard now for all fees. There's no issue that's unique about transportation utility. It's for all fees. It's just, it's easy to find that number for most of what we're imposing fees on. You have a pretty clear cost. But or you move into the arena of something like transportation utility fee, finding that number that you can defend as being a reasonable is much more difficult. It's not impossible, but it still has to be done. But the standard is not new for fees. We want the right to consider a fee. Then the question becomes, is it a reasonable fee? I will personally tell you, I'm not going to name cities, but of the 13 that has been posted, there are some that I think are close to bulletproof. I think they've done a great job of coming up with a rationale. There's some that will lose in court. It's challenged. And the question here is, the court's going to make that decision, or is there a value of having the legislature make it? I can go both ways on that argument.
I think you can, but I think it may be an easier position for us to defend with the legislature to submit to some reasonable requirements and be proactive about that rather than trying to fight everything and get preempted or whatever. I think working on this and just saying, look, this is needed And it's, and if it's done right, it's not onerous, it's fair. But I think helping to structure that, probably the best course for us to be able to continue to do it.
I don't think you have a choice but to engage, because you have the Taxpayer Association of Libertas and an interesting third party with former connections to the league, who have said they are inserting themselves into the dialogue and are pushing legislators the other way. So we have to be engaged in this at the legislative
Well, I
level.
mean, we're trying to draft legislation ourselves.
Yeah, that's the way it's a great program. It's a great fee. I mean, we've been able to replace so many roads and fix them, and so
Seth, did you have something?
I think we've had it for 4 years, maybe. I might be wrong. You guys probably know she's looked into it, but.
I just want to add my voice of support that as long as there are groups that are opposed to it and the legislature doesn't act, we're always going to be talking about this. About, boy, it'd be nice if we could, it'd be nice if we could. If the legislature is at all leaning towards talking about it and potentially having a bill that would authorize it specifically, much to the point of these guiding principles, I think we're in a better place to get it approved, if you will, to the legislation, and have this as a tool that we can all use. And I think we do reasonable well. And when we don't, our residents tell us about it, and we get that fixed on a fairly regular basis. I think it's a good move forward. Number 3 scares me because I don't know how the legislature will do that, right? In terms of doable, not easy, but it's not impossible. But I like our chances of being engaged in that conversation and helping to make the process doable for us if we choose to impose it.
I just want to put a brief finer point on the sort of political nature of this among friends. The tone of this conversation about this really, really important issue should not be, cities are going to go out and many cities are going to go out and impose this fee. If the feel of this discussion is there's a flood of fees coming, that's going to encourage the legislature to just clamp it down. The feel of this needs to be, the legislature is going to impose parameters on process and reasonableness. And the cities are partnering with the legislature on establishing those parameters. And sometimes, as a friendly observer, there is a dynamic among cities of saying, you know, stop the legislature from imposing restrictions on us. And to the points that Cam and others have already made, the restrictions are already there. You're going to have to do this reasonableness and process anyway from the court cases. So this isn't really imposing a new restriction. And so I would just caution against fighting too hard against these reasonable parameters. This can be something that goes, hopefully goes relatively smoothly. And it is a politically conservative thing to do to impose reasonable parameters on process for imposing this fee. That should just be the feel of the discussion as it goes forward.
Yeah, I think that's just saying, we agree with this. We agree there should be some parameters. We just need to police ourselves. We're willing to do that. Here's the parameters. We are willing to police ourselves based on those parameters.
Can I ask one question, Cam, about, because maybe it's even a Roger question. You know, we have lots of different types of accounts, from enterprise funds to their general fund. Is the thought that this would sit in a new type of restricted account, and the first city that imposed it, and would that account have the option for revenue transfers, like, for instance, an enterprise fund for a power department?
Yeah, so, well, I can address that real fast. So item number 7 references dedicated account, but we did not use the word enterprise fund just yet, because our subgroup has been having those very questions. Should it be an enterprise fund, follow those same principles? And you've asked a couple of good policy questions that our policy subgroup just started asking. And that's why we wanted to kind of scale it back and get the principles in place. And then we can start asking.
All restricted accounts are not enterprise funds, but all enterprise funds tend to be restricted accounts. And I think the question was, well, whether this is a restricted account is a fair policy call. It really is not an enterprise. It's it's just a revenue source, but it should be dedicated or something, I think it's a fair question, but I hope we use different terms.
So, well, can the work group have in mind just to be careful about opening any Pandora's box about our revenue fund?
Well, and then,
I'm extra sensitive as well as you.
well, and if you go back up to item 2, and if item 2 is basically saying narrowly tailored to the top, not impact any other types of city imposed user fees. We could actually, maybe just to address this, just change that to say not impact other types of city revenues. And just, that's broader than the user fees, but the whole idea is, we're talking tough, legislation should be only tough.
My other question is about bonding against that as a potential revenue stream. So if you had a really significant bridge or something, could you use it as a bondable stream of revenue?
That's one of the questions we posed to our policy group that we didn't get to in our meeting a week or 2 ago. So we'll be working through all of those details.
Okay,
So Mayor, I'm actually going to suggest we change number 2 to say not impact other types of city revenues, just to make it a little broader, but then otherwise I think we're ready for a motion.
okay. Somebody want to make a motion on this?
Make a motion that we pass this recommendation with the amendment that you just suggested.
Is that adequate for you? Okay, is there a second?
Yeah.
Okay, Mayor Tran, Mayor Shepherd. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, there you go.
Perfect, great. Thank you, everyone. The first meeting will be later this week. Provo reps, while you're here today, right after board meeting on our way to LPC, which is weekly touch base, because I think it'd be helpful to have someone from Provo with us.
For a while.
Yeah. Okay, we still have about 30 minutes and we have 2 more things we need to get to, and that's the discussion on caucuses and the presentation from Envision Utah. So we'll start with Envision Utah. I want to welcome Ari Bruning and his team back. Ari will take about 15 minutes for your return and report, and then Justin, that should still leave you 10 to 12 minutes to get quick feedback on caucuses, and then we'll depart for LPC. So Ari and team, thank you for being here. Take it away.
So first of all, thanks to whoever at Envision Utah turned 1A onto me to be able to talk to them about pro fishers in Utah. And if anybody's interested in that, I was on that program last Thursday. It's like the last 15 or 20 minutes of the program. But I got a chance to talk about the growth issues we are facing, bring in the Wasatch Choice Vision, bring in the survey that we're doing with guiding your growth and all that stuff.
And we spotlighted in Friday.
Did an excellent job. So I'm going to give a little intro to stall the time while we get Ryan's slides up. So just to remind you, we have a contract with the Division Department of Workforce Services, where we are tasked with looking at land use regulation and tied to housing affordability and make recommendations. We put together a stakeholder group, which is met how many times? 3 times? A mixture of developers and cities, and ask them, what do you think the recommendations should be? And a few things rose to the top as clear areas of focus. Number 1 was smaller lot sizes. These are probably in order, actually. Number 2, smaller homes. Number 3, more units per lot / building. So that might be an ADU, or it might be a duplex or a 3-plex or a 4-plex, that kind of thing. And then number 4 was mixed use. So allowing people to reduce their transportation expense. So those were the things that rose to the top. We did some analysis looking at different ordinances that we were tasked to do around the state. And we are now at the point of putting together recommendations which are due by the end of September. I think the original intent of this money was to come up with a whole bunch of recommendations for changes to state law. Not where we've landed. We don't feel like that's the right direction to go. I think we've got a couple that relate to state law, but they're not changing land use mandates for cities. They're other things. Instead, we're focused more on voluntary recommendations. So, and we want to make sure that these recommendations are things that cities can live with, and also that developers can live with, which is why we're here, to make sure that we get the feedback that we that we would like from cities. So with that, I'm gonna let Ryan walk you through these draft recommendations, and I will emphasize draft. These are hot off the press. They're not written down anywhere really, other than on these slides. So we're looking for your feedback.
Before you start, who's on your subcommittee? You have developers as well, so.
Elected officials, city planners, planning staffs, developers. I mean, honestly, anyone who we felt like was a housing policy expert. So, and that group was probably about 60 people. Yeah, so, and we tried to get a very good representation from cities just because that's who's would need to implement at the end of the day, right? So.
No, Vernon, that does include league reps. We've been participating, having a lot of vision.
And I have a sub-consultant market expert who's been doing some research looking at all of the academic research around the country and what rises to the top, and it's generally the same things that I just mentioned. So just now, Ryan watched.
All right, I don't know, I was paying attention to the mix, so I don't know if Ari mentioned this, but we are also at the behest of, Department of Workforce Services, Housing and Development. That is what we're working on. So I'm gonna go old school here, because our slides have not come through. Ari mentioned that we went through 35 different zoning and zoning and ordinance regulations. That is statewide. That is one in every, at least one city and one county in every AOG. Just so you know, we're not picking on any specific city or Wasatch or the Wasatch Front here. But and everyone in this group knows this. This is a very small percentage of this housing cost. We feel like, as we've dug into this, is coming from the regulations, right? There's so many factors. There's material costs, land costs, mortgages, interest rates, all these things that are adding to the price of housing. So keep in mind when we make these recommendations, we're saying this is a small part of the pie here. So, the one thing though that's specific to Utah, I say interest rates, well, that's federal. But one thing that's really pushing this housing, the housing demand in Utah is the number of people that are like 25 to, 30, 35 years old. These people want to buy homes, right? They are in the prime years of when you buy a home. So we have a huge, well, not a huge, but a significant part of our population in that age demographic. So I'm going to start moving through these fastest because we are time limited. So these are our state recommendations. And this one's, we were, I wouldn't say criticized, but informed at our board meeting that it's pretty soft. Educate the public about the need for more housing. Simple theory here is that what you do in the local government tends to reflect public preferences. You get the pressure from the public. So if we educate the public, they'll come to you and say, we need more housing. You can reflect your regulations. So that's number one. Number two is something we heard to Cam's point regarding our growth. Regarding our growth project that's going on with the governor's office, we heard time and time again, why don't we do a large scale analysis, not at the city level, maybe at the county or some sort of regional level? Where's the land? Where's the water? We want to understand, and so we can direct growth a little bit. Where can we put the infrastructure to direct that growth? I'll come back to transportation because I know Andrew's probably wondering about that one. The other thing we heard, and this is 3 and 4, that we need to train local government officials about what they can do to help promote this housing affordability. We know, November is going to come. There will be a changeover in our elected staff. Some people might have even gotten elected on an anti-growth platform. So educating good materials. And then we also heard in terms of like best practices and materials, everyone can get online. There's materials everywhere. Which one should I be looking at? So one single place where Utah communities can access and go to those best practices. One more specific one at the state level that we heard, maybe not quite as educate, is condominiums. We've heard the financing requirements for our condominiums are onerous, I would say. All right, what were you telling me? We've heard 50% of the units.
Pre-sell 50% of the units to get financed.
So, condos are a great entry level. Get into a condo, build some equity, and then maybe at some point when the condo doesn't fit your needs, you can move up into what does fit your needs. So, and then not pointing to Andrew, but in this general direction, what we heard from especially the southwest parts of, kind of pointing in this direction, Utah County, Salt Lake County, is transportation infrastructure. It's hard, it's difficult to improve more housing. At every single meeting, they come out and whine, form, but, got transportation congestion and problems, it's hard for the council to be like, okay, let's do more housing. So, so the state can assist communities with transportation infrastructure, more money for transportation. All right. And then this one also talks to transportation and our land use, but state level financing, the Wasatch Choice for 2050 is an awesome centers place plan. What can we do to, for that 2050 plan? Well, what we heard time and time again is help us with the parking. Parking's expensive, for these centers, for these transcendental developments, help us finance that, help us with, pay for that. So, and this Ari, I think that's, oh, there's one more. And this one is more pointed statewide to our rural areas because it is a statewide project. This is about offsite construction. We all know, well, modular homes have changed a lot since the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of very poor examples of modular homes. The modern ones are pretty nice. I wish I had a better picture. Adopt statewide standards for offsite construction. I'm going to loop back on this when I come to the city, but statewide for modular homes, statewide construction compliance, especially things like that. So, all right. Now we're going to talk local government. I already mentioned this where we started. Allow smaller lot sizes. Just we're constrained here in the Wasatch Front, so look at your zoning, look at your regulations, and consider smaller lot sizes. I know many cities have already done this.
Would that limit just the Wasatch Front then, the other communities would not have that in requirement?
No, it would probably, it would probably be, I mean, this is more pointed to local, but I think it would still be a statewide recommendation. I don't know that, we want to be very careful not pointing our fingers in any one direction. So, there's probably places, in Washington or Cache that could apply to pretty easily.
And I should mention too, when we write up these recommendations, it's easy to say allow smaller lot sizes. What we want to provide is some guidance on where is that appropriate, what kind of setbacks and things might work. How do you deal with concerns that people have brought up, like on-street parking and snow plowing and things like that? So we're going to try to provide all of that in this recommendation, beyond just saying allow smaller lot.
Thanks for there, Ari. Okay, recommendation number 2 for the cities, draft recommendations, allow more units per lot. We've talked a lot about ADUs, but duplexes or other forms of allowing more. I'd like to point out, I have a nice photo in Daybreak. They do these things called mansion homes. I couldn't even tell. Ari was showing me these, like, there's 4 units in this thing. I couldn't tell it wasn't a single family house, honestly. So lots of creative ideas to get to that, to get there. This one's a little, Ari and I have been struggling with. The recommendation is build smaller homes, and I'm talking about actual home, smaller square footage. That's pretty tricky when developers, say, hey, the market demands 2,500 square feet. Well, as we know, 2,500 square foot home is quite expensive. Historically, we built a lot of homes that were, in that 1,100, under 1,500 square foot range. We're not building a lot of those right now. So this one's pretty tricky. We don't have specific recommendations. We could start talking about smaller lot sizes, and that probably leads to smaller homes, but it's a tricky one. Actually, when the market's really pushing in developers, then we can make more sense. So it's good.
In fact, we'd love some feedback. If your cities have done anything that has promoted construction of smaller homes, we'd love to hear it. As far as we can tell, that's not being driven by regulation.
What about promoting, I mean, for some of us that have older neighborhoods, is there a way to promote kind of redoing of those homes? I mean, some of these are 60, 70-year-old homes, and now that people are trending towards smaller spaces, they're often downtown and, close to center where they're more walkable. Help with that, I don't know, might be an idea.
Good feedback. All right, I know I'm moving fast here purposely. All right, mixed use development here about. I'm not gonna slide anywhere. And then the last couple of ones here are, promote mixed use and development. We've talked time and time again, Wabash Choice 2050 in the center. But how about, this might be revolutionary, I know we all look at these commercial zones for a tax base, but what if we allowed housing in our commercial areas? Pretty revolutionary, but there's a lot of decaying or underperforming commercial areas that we could look at and say, what if we zone that for housing? It's a thought, it's an idea that we heard time and time again.
Isn't that already allowable?
Looking at the group here.
I mean, yes, in many areas.
Yeah.
A city can do it.
Yeah.
The recommendation is
Based on our ordinance, the ordinances we looked at, most commercial.
Where you can do an overlay to allow.
You do that. I mean, obviously, the challenge is cities are funded on, except for transportation utility fees that might come, property tax and sales tax, and our residents love property tax increases. Love them.
Yeah, lots of data back.
Yeah, lots. And so it's a challenge to give up on a commercial area that might generate sales tax.
Yeah, and we do have, I mentioned we have a market consultant doing some work. One of the things they're doing is they're looking at some areas that have transitioned from kind of struggling retail to mixed use. And they're looking at how the tax base has changed. And I think of the 5 examples they looked at, 4 of them increased the tax base when they added housing.
But if you do it right, it substantiates the commercial, and makes the commercial stronger, which will continue to generate that revenue.
At rooftops, yeah, at rooftops, that supports the
Right.
retail, whatever they're trying to do.
I'd love for you guys to look at Park City. I've been personally very interested in their ordinance to require in mixed use developments that the main floor be traditional retail rather than like office space. So that it's generating some sales tax revenue. You could put office space on the second floor and residents on the third floor, but sales tax generation is important. Or we need to change truth in taxation standards.
And can I mention, I do think that's a little different than what you said. I think we all are seeing the same thing. Okay, if we're talking about taking a commercial zone, adding a housing component to it, not replacing it with a housing component. That's not gonna fly as well for all the reasons that have been said. Adding it can enhance it, can make it better. Eliminating it and replacing it with housing is just gonna cost cities more money and take away the shopping opportunities and the convenience of community that people expect where they live. So I think just what you called it, based on what's been discussed here, were 2 different things, and I think that's an important
The nuances are important.
nuance.
Mixed use.
But how much commercial?
All right, I have 2 more, and then I'd love to hear more feedback. So, from the city, and this, I can't point just to the city, I got to point developers on this one too, and they, we heard time and time again about development, the delays in development and the planning and the approval process results in cost. I think that's just as much on the builder as it is on the city. If you're turning in plans that don't meet requirements, of course, they're gonna get redlined. Of course, they're gonna get pushed back, right? And that starts the cycle again. So that's a recommendation for both sides of the table. And then this one loops back on the off-site construction. I talked a little bit briefly about what the state could do, but on the city side, if it doesn't meet those state requirements, allowed manufacturing home. I know this one's not, may not make cities happy, but if it meets all the rezoning requirements and it meets those state level requirements, why don't we do? There's great examples of off-site construction modular homes that are being built. So with that, just make sure. I would love to hear your feedback. Cam, I'm hopefully going to take too much time. I know I was moving fast.
So, let me just frame this. We have about 10 more minutes. We need, in order to make it LPC, we have about a 10-minute flexibility there. Everything that Envision Utah has highlighted here is consistent with what we expect out of the Guiding Our Growth survey results. And it's consistent with what we told you earlier in the summer we anticipated. So just connecting the dots about why we think September is going to blow up as all these pieces come together. So great presentation. Other thoughts for Envision while you've got them here?
as an electrician, I worked in modular homes and made homes. The old modular homes was a problem, the newer ones, I think if you took the people on some tour, they didn't put those in the kind of homes, I think people would be surprised and most people would be able to tell the difference. I think they've improved that well. So I agree, I think that's what you do. Something made a difference for me when I bought my first house, was sweat equity. Can you tell me what happened to sweat equity? That's still available and why have you not used it?
And we heard that a lot in rural areas too. That was actually one of like the top 3 recommendations. They said, hey, sweat equity programs allow me to, I don't have a bank, when I built a few homes and every single one of them, I used sweat equity. I'm not sure the current, where the current financing is. I think a lot of it got a lot tighter in 2008, 2009, when we had that, the war in market crash. I think a lot of that went away. I think it's still possible, but it's not as easy to access.
Very, very few banks would sign on to that.
Yeah, it used to be so much easier to qualify for.
So it's not the city's problem, it's the bank's problem?
I think it's a finance problem. I think that's where it originates. Yeah, so to your point, the cities have a small, a smaller part of this buyers. Anyway, other thoughts or, questions, thoughts, or guidance for us? I appreciate you. I was talking fast. I know it was.
So I really think of what's about quiet, do the mixed use and commercial, we approved that in our city a few years ago. Developers haven't taken advantage of it. They've talked to us, we told them that they haven't done it. But we have opened that door.
And I appreciate you bringing that up. We've talked to a lot of developers too, that say, they have tried, and we try to build a main level that's adaptable, with top high ceilings and electrical and whatnot. So that space is adaptable, but we've talked to developers and they say similar things. It's a hard product to sell. The market might not be ready for it. I appreciate you getting everything ready at the city. I feel like it's something we will hopefully take through, but we heard that on both sides.
And what we hear too, is that it's easier for developers to do.
Well, it is. I just feel like quite often, if the city is creating the roadblocks, and I'm just saying, often we're not. We open the door for it, and the developers are not taking advantage of those, because there's other ways to make money easier, that taking advantage of cities opportunities.
And I would go back to the financing issue too. It's a little bit more tricky product to finance instead of, so there's a few little hiccups in this.
You have to have both markets firing at the same time.
Yeah, there's some, yeah. Good point.
Another thing I'd love to have you guys look at is the financing of parking structures. We had a developer approach our city during legislative session that wanted us, he was getting funding through UDOT that would have to be secured by the city in order to build a parking structure for his multifamily project. And we were uncomfortable due to the nature of this particular developer being the backstop to their parking structure. So ways to finance parking structures that don't include putting the risk of the structure on the back of all the residents of the city for their commercial venture. So there's got to be a better way to get funding for the large parking structures.
This topic is being talked about in a few UEOC subgroups that we're working with the league on as well.
Great point. Yeah. We hadn't heard that. Thank you. That's a very interesting perspective.
I'm happy to tell you further offline why we didn't want to.
Extra.
Mayor.
Yeah, hey, thank you. Appreciate this. One thought that I'd like to point out, and it might seem like, oh yeah, that's just her because she is South Jordan. Well, maybe it is. However, I just wanted to ask, because I thought this in our executive committee meeting the other day too, when I saw the slides and I saw, this is mostly directed about cities, right? Recommendations of what cities can do, whatever. If there's an example, especially a positive example, you referred to the mansion homes that have the 4 units in them. Rather than referring to the neighborhood that those are in, refer to the city that allowed it. Don't call it Daybreak, call it South Jordan, because that matters. It matters to us, and it's going to matter to other developers or other cities or whatever. So if we're talking about what's been done wrong or right, use the name of the city, not the developer or the development.
Well, and I think to your point too, Daybreak's a very cool place I like a lot, but we do hear a little negative feedback on it. They're like, oh, well, that's Daybreak. That's, you know, a huge master development of thousands and thousands of acres. What about smaller states?
Right.
So South Jordan it is.
Right. Just pointing out, it was like, we're not the only ones that'll be in that. We don't, nobody else has quite that big of a, mega development. That's just one master development, but there are awesome developments all over the place, and some of them are, doing really great things, but it really comes down to, if we're talking about what the cities allow, what they don't allow, and what standards are approved, that's what we're talking about. If that's what we're talking about, I would just ask them to the name of the cities.
Well, if anyone, Mayor especially, if anyone, we are responsible for putting together a report and handing it off to community, to everybody else. If you have examples that you could point us to of awesome units, we would love that for our report, whether it's in South Jordan or, or in others.
But there's laws, right? And that's why I'm bringing it up. It's a little, it's coming from me because it's close to home for me. But it's not just me, right? There's a lot of communities with great examples.
Oh, I'll add to that. I totally agree. Using the city name is really important. Coming from Mapleton, where we get a lot of criticism that we're not doing our part or anything. We just approved a 1,000-unit, 990 development over 640 acres. That's a master plan with 600 high-density houses, all condos and apartments. So I kind of am like, now it's been around for 2011. It was sold to somebody else, and now we've approved this. But if you don't use the name, then we can't say, hey, guess what? Even those cities you thought were really holding out, do you actually know what they're doing? So I really love that point.
And I appreciate we're responsible for this report. I obviously wasn't sensitive to the name, so.
We might be a little sensitive.
Well, but I think since this is directed at cities generally, if we're going to use examples, clearly we don't usually point out cities and go to that as a terrible example and they should not have done that, right? We don't do that. However, if we're pointing to positive examples about, here's an idea, this is directed at cities, don't use the name of the development, or the developer use the name of the city that approved it, right? And that's my asking.
Ryan, we've got,
Right.
My citizens hate it.
we've got about 10 case studies for cities that have done great, like development-centered development. Some of them are, you're one of them, like, we'll provide those to you also.
Yeah, if you send them our way,
Yeah.
we will incorporate them.
Sure.
Thank you.
My last, we're gonna do this similar, but a longer version of a similar presentation, August 22nd at 2:00. We have that group of about 50 or 60 stakeholders. If anyone would like to join us for more, another try at this, please reach out and get you an invite. With that,
Let me piggyback on what Ryan just said. Envision Utah has been very responsive, very deliberative, and they've been very collaborative over the last few months. I was actually personally very relieved when they received the funding, because there were other groups that were applying for it, because I knew Envision was going to be focused on trying to find consensus and wasn't driving toward a specific agenda. So I appreciate Envision's outreach to us as well as to the board specifically. A lot of this was just to kind of plant the seed, recognizing the guiding our growth survey data that's coming, this research that they're doing, and a lot of other moving pieces that we'll explain actually in more detailed LPC. So when you inevitably have a thought at 3 o'clock this afternoon, send it to league staff. We can get it to Envision, and we'll likely have them. We may have them come again at the board meeting in September, depending on where they're at. But this was really the perfect timing to have them report back. Councilmember.
I was just going to ask if there was some information on those slides that would be helpful for us to get a better picture of it. Could those be emailed to us?
and Nick, I just sent them to you. I just sent them to you. If they don't come through, I can send them again right away out of the office. Yeah. good. Remember, they're draft. They're draft.
You might want to clean it up a little bit.
Okay, so we're gonna need to move on, I'm afraid, I'm sorry.
So,
Thank you,
perfect.
guys.
Thank you for being here. So we are at 11:29. The executive director report can wait till September, because we all had some really successful interactions with league staffs around the country. But Justin wanted to ask a couple of key caucus questions to set up for the annual convention. So Justin, take it away.
All right, so this was kind of like in the legislative session when you come to a committee with a lot of talking points ready to go, and they say, and now we're going to take 30 seconds for public comment. This is going to be a very similar situation, so excuse a non-lengthy pitch on this one. But given the time, we'll get quick to the point. So as everybody knows, at every convention, we break up into our caucus meetings to have discussions on various numbers of topics. And so a couple questions I want to throw out here, and we don't have the time for a lot of discussion. But one, are there topics or types of topics that we approach that you think are more useful than others, or that you think would be useful in a month from now when we meet in our caucus meeting? So that's the first question, is what should we talk about in a month? Simplified version. Second question is there a way, or should the board be more involved in caucus meetings? The way they're run right now is we have staff get up, we run the caucus meetings, we answer questions. But as we're thinking about this, we wondered if it might make a lot of sense for members of the board to be the ones who actually get up and moderate these discussions, and staff can participate and take notes and be a part of that. But wondered if it might make some sense for the board to take a more active role in actually running the caucus meeting. So again, first question is there anything you think we should talk about? And two, would you as a board be willing to be moderators for our caucus meeting discussions?
How many caucus meetings are there altogether?
We've got 5 separate caucus meetings. Yep.
I think that's a good idea too.
Yeah, go. Let's take one.
With staff there to keep it.
Staff will be there, yeah, staff will not run out and go to lunch. Although tempting, I like it.
You just bought an hour. Yeah.
So I'm not hearing anyone say no. So what I will do is I will shoot out an email in where we know which caucuses you generally go to, and you can help us coordinate that. But if you have ideas in the next month about what you think we should be talking about, I know a lot of times the board meeting is after caucus meetings. That's not always the case. Down in St. George, we have board meeting the day before caucus meeting. So we will not be back together again before we go into those caucus meetings. So we'll have to coordinate this electronically, but yeah.
One of the challenges is, like, I would like to go to 2 different caucuses, and I don't have the opportunity because we don't host 2 different series. Like, here, you can choose session A or session B on rapid growth. Who can't go to rapid growth? I mean, seriously. So I'm not even sure we have all the right caucuses, which we've talked about before. Should we have more caucuses, more defined caucuses? I think that still should be on the table, but if there's an opportunity to run each one twice so we can go to 2, you might actually have smaller groups and get better participation. I know when we're hanging out in rapid growth, there's a bajillion people in there. It's possible to be more productive if you had smaller groups. So just food for thought.
And I do want to have a large discussion about caucuses at some point, but with a month out, I don't want to fix the whole thing.
Don't break it right now.
We'll break it later.
Yep.
One other thing I'll note that's in the board packet is we held a caucus meeting of the cities in first and second class last month. Didn't get a chance to review with the board the feedback we received from that caucus, but it's in your packet. And that'll, as we get closer to the session, prioritizing topics, that's something we did to try to improve caucuses. Is for the city's first and second class, we're holding additional meetings through the year, not just at the conferences, to get feedback. And it was a very productive conversation when we met last month.
Okay, well, that gave me what I need, so thank you all.
Okay.
Except topics.
Any other
I
business?
think those are gonna come up.
You all think of topics in the next month. Everyone will text me something.
We can't record in September, so we'll have to have another hour for our meeting.
Well, so actually, just a quick reminder about the timing for September. The annual convention's in 3 weeks. It's right after Labor Day, so please make sure you register. Salt Palace bumped us up this year. So September 6th to the 8th. The board meeting will be at 4 o'clock on that Wednesday.
It will be, the calendar invite says 4 o'clock, because of caucuses, it'll be at 4:45, so we'll send that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, thank you, Nick. We'll be adjusting that because of how we've had to build out the conference, but we will have food during that board meeting. Then the new board takes office on Friday of the conference. We'll send out updated calendar invites to new board members and existing board members. And in September and October, we're adjusting the calendars a little bit for board and LPC because of the UEOC timing and because the legislature has changed their legislative interim calendars for September and October. So we're trying to make sure we have LPC and board meetings at the right times so we can bring things to you and get feedback before we go into those meetings. So stay tuned for those calendar invites. That's it.
So I have one last thing real quick about, if you're interested, I know you've got the agendas put together for the convention. If you have an opening or someone cancels, which order would you go and fill that? We had cybersecurity incidents this summer, if others might be interested to hear what we learned from those experiences.
You got that. We actually were planning on having a workshop on lessons learned in cybersecurity. Love to have you.
We have the state cybersecurity guys coming to talk about that, but they were looking for some cities to help out, so I will connect those dots. Yeah, we'll get you.
And in advance, I appreciate your willingness to share, because to open yourself up and say, this happened to us and it sucks and whatever. But for all of us to learn from it, that's very valuable.
We also,
Made a major effect on us.
we also invite your IT people to come to the Friday of the conference. Normally Thursday's Planners Day and Reporters Day, but on Friday, that's when we're gonna have the cybersecurity workshop. And when our closing keynote is the former spy who captured Robert Hansen, famous from the movie Breach. But the whole focus of that is around cybersecurity. So please invite your IT folks to come to that half day on Friday. Okay.
And make sure to get registered for the conferences, because not our deadline.
I wasn't planning on being there.
This Wednesday of this week, then you get a late fee, so.
Sign up quick.
Motion to close.
Okay, motion to adjourn. All in favor? Out of here, see you at LPC.